future, talk radio will actually educate, inspire, and make you think. The future is now. Topics and music that affect your life from Universal Broadcasting Network. Tune in at ubnradio.com.
She's passionate about telling stories of amazing women who are rocking the world and empowering women to live, love, and thrive. Here's your host, Catherine Gray.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Live, Love, Thrive Women's Empowerment Hour, brought to you by 360karma.com. We're so happy to have you with us today. And be sure to subscribe to us on YouTube so you don't miss any of the episodes of the amazing women that we have on every week. And, of course, follow us on My 360 Karma on Twitter and 360 Karma on Facebook and Instagram. Hopefully they don't add any more social media or we might be here all day. Anyway, so as you know, we always have incredible women every week. And today we have Mumsey Nemiroff. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly. And I'm sure she'll tell me if I didn't. And she is just an incredible lady who's still rocking it in her 80s. She's such an inspiration to us all. Looking forward to talking to her. Please give a warm welcome to Mumsey. Hi. How are you?
Thank you for the nice introduction.
Oh my gosh. I don't know how you do all you do. You are such an inspiration to me and everyone I know that's listening. You're in your 80s.
Yes,
You look
I was
fabulous.
83 2 weeks ago.
Oh my God, 2 weeks ago.
Yes.
That's fantastic.
And I celebrated it in London.
Oh my gosh. I'm so glad that you said London because that takes us back to your roots.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, those really are my roots.
Right. So I know your grandmother was a real trailblazing woman for
Yes,
her
she
time.
was.
She owned a restaurant in London, right?
Yes, around 1900
Wow.
in London.
Isn't that something?
Yes.
Yeah, it must have been so unusual for a woman to own a business.
Oh, I'm sure that it
Yeah.
was.
Yeah.
And her husband, my grandfather,
Uh-huh.
the family always referred to him as the one with the wanderlust. So he was always out.
Yeah.
Exploring new places that maybe life would be better because she worked very hard in
Yeah.
her restaurant.
Yeah.
And my father and his brothers were all born in London, and they were the busboys in the restaurant when
Oh
they
my
got old
gosh.
enough.
Wow. So, in pursuit of something better, they ended up coming here to America.
Yes.
But even that in itself was an interesting story. She
Yes.
sold the restaurant, picked up the family to come here only to be turned away at Ellis Island, right?
Correct, correct. My father had an ear infection, and they were immigrants. They hardly spoke the kind of English that was required to explain about an ear infection. But rather than return to London, she made her way to Halifax, Nova Scotia,
Yeah.
and waited until she could arrange passage on a boat that went down the St. Lawrence Seaway to Chicago, where she settled. And my grandfather eventually joined her there.
That's
And
brilliant.
what-
I mean, she was determined, huh?
She not only was determined, but when she got to Chicago, she opened a nightclub.
Oh my gosh, wow.
It was called the Blue Inn.
Oh my gosh.
And so many of the early 20th century entertainers, Paul Muni, Ben Leslie, and all old-time vaudevillians
Oh my
would
gosh, how
frequent her
cool.
nightclub.
That is so interesting.
Yes.
And so then your father grew up in Chicago, and that's where your parents met?
Yes.
Yeah.
My parents met on Memorial Day weekend.
Uh-huh. You told me a cute story.
Yes.
Yeah.
My mother and her best girlfriend were standing at the bus stop with golf clubs. They were on their way to play golf.
Right.
And my father and his boyfriend, they were students together,
Yeah.
drove by in an open convertible and said, "Hey, girls, want to ride?" And shockingly, for that time, my mother and her girlfriend got into the car.
Yeah.
And they all played golf together. And that was it. My father was smitten with this cute little golfing girl.
Yeah. And
So they got married.
and how many years were they married?
They were married 64 years.
Wow.
And when my father began to decline in health, he had had a stroke. The social worker at the facility asked me to come in for a private talk and said, I know you're very close with your parents. I'm an only child.
Right, right.
And when one goes, you must understand that the other will very quickly go. And I said, I'm fully prepared for that. They've had a wonderful life and a great love affair. However, my father passed away, and my mother had 2 subsequent husbands and died at 99.
Oh my gosh, that's a great story. Yeah, women are much more resilient, for
Yes,
sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Women say what is. Now I put one foot in front of the other and go out there.
Yeah. Well, good for her. So you come from a strong lineage of women.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
And so that would explain your incredible life. I know, backing up to you meeting your first husband out here in LA, right?
Yes.
Your first husband turned out to be gay.
Yes.
Right? So that kind of explains that all in the nutshell pretty quickly. So let's move on to husband number 2, who ends up being the love of your life. He was your son's
Little League coach. And
right.
I was the team mother.
Yeah.
We were really...
And you two scandalously met while you were still married, right?
Oh, we were both married to 2 different people.
Yeah, yeah.
And seeing each other at Little League games. And of course we thought nobody knew. But the truth was everybody knew.
Right. Well, so it obviously worked out. You've been
Yes.
together 38 years.
No longer. We've been married. We've been legal for 38 years.
Right. But known each other like
there
50.
has been,
Yeah.
yes, a lot of panky preceding that, that marriage.
Right, right. Well, it worked out.
Yes.
Yeah. And so tell me how you got into traveling since 1974 every year over to the continent of Africa.
Yes.
And what work you're doing there. And, you've told me about interesting things that, when I say interesting, things that are not happening not for the good over there with regard to the extinction of certain species
Wildlife.
as well as human beings being
Absolutely.
displaced from their villages. Let's
Yes.
talk about that.
I was in Ethiopia in late October and November. And I had visited Ethiopia before, and it's a very, very rich culture. It goes back thousands of years to the Queen of Sheba, actually, and King Solomon.
Right. And speaking of this, okay, you were just in Ethiopia, but why did you start going to Africa in the first place in 1974? Let's start with that, and then
Everybody
we'll work up
asks
to today.
me that because I'm such an Africa addict now.
Yeah.
I had gone back to school when I separated from my first husband. And my second husband was extremely supportive of whatever I wanted to do. And I would be writing my thesis, and he'd be off at Mammoth skiing with my son.
Yeah.
I mean, it was wonderful how we were able to do that. So there was a class. It was on the graduate level at UCLA. And it was called Advanced Studies in African Culture. And I knew nothing about that, but
you've always been an art historian and lectured about that, but this was your first entree into African art.
Into Africa.
And you just really took to it.
Well, the timing of that class for a year coincided with what time as a mom I would have to be home.
Yes.
And gave me the latitude. So I signed up for it.
Right.
And a world opened up to me.
Yeah.
A world of reality that I wanted to explore.
Yeah.
And so that led me to talking a few girlfriends into joining me. And we went on my first trip. I was the leader of the group.
Of course
never
you
had
were.
been there before. We went to 9 countries across West Africa.
And you told me some of these you couldn't go to today.
Many of them.
Like Ghana and Nigeria.
Well,
right?
you have to be very careful where you go,
Right.
especially in West Africa.
And it wasn't as dangerous then?
No,
Or- yeah.
no. People were not so divisive. There was no Boko Haram or El Shabaab or ISIS to deal with.
Right.
We saw people of different faiths, people who followed a different path. Naturally, we were always called the European ladies. And people were very curious about us at that time. And I saw an Africa that I had only read about.
Wow.
The rituals, the dances, the color,
Yeah.
the singing and dancing, the music of Africa.
And I've heard it's such a happy culture, happy people.
Yes,
yeah.
well, it's not one culture.
Right.
Two villages can live across the river from one another, speak different dialects, and have completely different rituals.
Wow, interesting.
I'll give you an example of that. In Nigeria, there are a great many multiple births. There's outside of the normal multiple births, these occur much more frequently. On one side of the river, twins are coveted and treated in a very special way. On the other side of the river, they are considered cursed and are drowned.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
So that can tell you dialects different, rituals differ, and music and art, which is pervasive throughout tribal West Africa. It varies, and it's. I never stop learning. Whenever I go to Africa, I learn something more.
So you were just fascinated with it.
Yes.
And you wanted to take other people there to show them what you were experiencing.
Yes,
do you think maybe you lived there in a different life because you have such an affinity for it?
I'm convinced
Yeah,
of that.
I'm sure. Yeah. Yeah, I believe in those type of things. If we feel such a draw to something, I think
Yes.
there's something in our past.
Yes. My trip to Ethiopia this last fall was very sad for me to see what's happening because one lands on a jet plane in Addis Ababa, the capital, and there are building cranes and traffic jams and people rushing about at internet cafes and lovely hotels now. We flew into the southern Omo Valley, where there is forced relocation of the tribal peoples taking place.
Right. And you've told me this, like China and like Turkey and places like that are
Yes.
coming in and pushing the villages out in order to lease the land for things like tobacco and
Yes, their
cotton.
land
Yeah.
on which they have lived for thousands of years, the birthplace, the cradle of civilization as we know it. Man first stood upright in
Right.
the Rift Valley there.
Right. Wow.
And now I am told by the people that their cattle is their only industry today, raising, trading, and selling cattle. The cattle are skin and bones, and the cattle are dying.
And now this is because they've been moved to an area that does not sustain their crops or their
Correct.
cattle.
Correct.
So it's like, how do they survive?
Barely.
And at the same time, you said that they're building dams that's diverting their water too.
Yes.
So I think a lot of people, and I'm so glad we're talking about this because most Americans have no idea that this is going on. I'm so happy that you're having this conversation and bringing this information back.
It's, I think, quite parallel to what occurred in our country in the 19th century.
With the Indians.
Yes, forced relocation of people, and they're put into very arid, desolate places, land that no one wants.
Right. Like for here, it was the desert.
Exactly,
Right.
exactly. Up on these plateaus, barren
Right.
stretches of land. And I saw the children with distended stomachs, and the elders said to me, our cattle are dying, our children are hungry, the crops won't grow. And one or two of the tribal communities have tried to return, and I visited them, and they're walking around with the brave young men carrying arms now, trying to maintain a life in their former community on a small vestige of what was their land.
Right.
And the plantations that I see, palm oil, sorghum, tobacco, cotton. They're vast plantations, and they are taking the water. Now, a fourth dam has been built on the extreme southern edge of Ethiopia as the Omo River water goes into Kenya. Now, when that dam is opened, 2/3 of the water from Lake Turkana in Kenya will be removed and siphoned off for these big plantations.
So you must feel so frustrated as to what could be done to save these tribes and these people. Is there a solution?
There is no solution. There is no solution other than the eventual diminishing of these tribes and the integration of them as dishwashers, entry-level jobs.
So these tribes are becoming extinct.
Yes.
And then the other thing of your concern, of course, is the animals there that are
Yes.
becoming extinct.
Yes.
And I know on your last trip, you were involved with that in the capacity of the rhinos.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And tell me about your involvement with that. Like, you were telling me that you all put chips in the
Yes.
horns. And tell me about that.
It was one of the neatest things I've ever done. We were trained by a vet and his team. And there was a sharpshooter and a pilot in a helicopter. We followed the helicopter in an open vehicle. They were looking for rhino out in the East Transvaal of South Africa, which is a vast open savanna with a lot of poaching. When they found, the first ones that they found were a mother and baby grazing. And so we followed them and then drove up to within a place that we could walk safely. The sharpshooter darts them from the air. And we have only 20 minutes at the most to work with them.
Wow.
As they go
And you're
to,
doing this now.
Yes.
At your age.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you just amaze me. I would,
well,
yeah.
I
So,
mean-
so wait, so they dart them and you
Yes,
and your
and-
posse go
yes.
over to the rhino.
we go over and they are now down on the ground nighty-night, we
Yeah.
hope.
Yeah.
And a group of us have been trained to work at the front end and some at the back end. I have done both. On the back end.
I don't want details on that. Keep going, Mumsy.
I was trained to give antibiotic shots
Right.
and a multivitamin
Right.
into the skin that is like the toughest leather sofa,
Wow.
putting a big thick needle through.
Wow. Wow. You are so gutsy. Yeah.
Well, no. Then
Yeah.
on the front end,
Yeah.
we put a hole in the ear and tag the rhino to show that it has been registered.
Right.
And then we put a computer chip into the horn. Now, you know, rhino horn is made of the same material as our fingernails.
Wow.
So it's not an ivory horn like an elephant would have.
Right.
So it's not difficult to insert a chip.
Right.
It doesn't protect the rhino from being poached,
Right.
but once that chip is removed from the rhino, it starts beeping. It emits a signal, and that person will be picked up who is in possession of the rhino horn.
I heard some of these things go for like $1 million.
Yes, yes.
So what you told me was that often they find these horns that have the chip in them in diplomat suitcases.
That's true.
Now, how
That's
sad is that?
That's the most
Yeah.
common way
Wow.
that these treasures for certain people leave the country.
Right.
So
Wow.
it's a very desperate situation.
It sure is.
And it's, you know, there used to be 45,000 cheetah on the African continent. Today there are between 4,000 and 5,000
oh
cheetah.
my gosh. Well, oh my gosh. This is so sad. And for those people out there listening that care, is there some way they could get involved with your travel, or are there, I guess there's different excursions out there that people could become a part of, being a part of helping with this extinction
Absolutely.
problem?
Yes.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm going back the end of November of this year, 2018, and I will be visiting a new group of lowland gorillas in the country of Congo.
Oh my gosh.
No, it's safe. It's
Yeah.
not, the old Zaire is now called the Democratic Republic of Congo. It's not that country.
Yeah.
It's a country along the Congo River called Congo.
Okay.
And they are newly habituated for human contact,
Yeah.
which is the life-saving measure for these animals.
Really?
Yes, the country of Rwanda, for instance, was the first to offer permits to tourists. And a permit in today's world to see 1 hour of gorillas in Rwanda is $1,500.
Oh my gosh.
So they
make it into a business.
And they are saving their own lives and the lives of their descendants
Right.
by welcoming tourists for 1 hour.
Wow, that's interesting. So this is an incredible thing that you're doing. Certainly, I could probably count on one hand the number of women in their 80s that are traveling to Africa. There might only be you, I have a feeling. But that's great that you're taking people over there and educating people about what's happening. To back up just a little bit, I know, first of all, I would imagine our guests want to know where you got the name Mumsy. And I think that's an interesting story. I know your family was really in the horse racing business, and
Yes.
that was the name of one of the horses, right?
No.
Oh, I thought that was it.
No,
Oh.
I named the horse.
Oh, you named the horse.
My father's farm
Okay.
was unpronounceable to me as
Oh.
a toddler. It was the El Dorado Farm.
Okay.
And I saw a baby born,
Yeah.
a little filly, and I crawled under the webbing into the stall when she was lying there, and I said, "You're my Mumsy, my sweet Mumsy."
Oh.
And so I've got that name ever since. It's a long time ago.
Oh, okay. So the horse was actually named by you, and then you were called Mumsy from then on.
Exactly.
Gotcha. So what's
Yes.
your real name?
Maxine.
Oh.
But that's only my passport and my driver's license.
Oh, so nobody knows that.
Nobody knows.
No,
Well, I
except for
think
the
a
whole
couple
world
people
now.
know it now.
Well, so, and your family was in horse racing, so you kind of grew up in horse racing, which was very interesting, right?
I grew up on
Yeah.
the racetrack.
Right, and we
And
won't
got
mention
to
the
travel.
mafia connection.
No, no, no. But I also became an equestrian, an
Right.
accomplished equestrian. And I've only recently given away my saddle, my boots, my
Oh my
helmet.
gosh,
in the
good for you.
Because at my age,
Yeah.
I had to come face to face
Yeah.
with the realism of my age.
I actually did have a great aunt who rode horses till she was 89, so I apparently have some good healthy stock
Absolutely.
too. And as far as horse racing goes, the very first time I went, I don't know, how old do you have to be? 18, I guess?
No, I was
16?
a little kid.
So I went, betting. I went to bet.
I used to bet.
Yeah, oh, you did?
Perhaps the law has changed.
So the very first time I went to horse racing, I put $2 down on a horse because I liked the number. It was like number 12, not knowing it was 40-1. It was the long shot, and it won. And I was hooked after that. I'm like, what? I put down $2. I got back $80. I liked this horse racing. But that must have been a fun culture to grow up in.
It really was.
Yeah. Exciting. You traveled all over, and your horses ran in some of the ones here, Del Mar and
Yes, yes. Golden Gate,
yeah.
Tanforan,
Yeah.
Santa Anita, and Hollywood Park.
Yeah, how cool.
And,
No wonder you grew up being an animal lover.
well,
Yeah,
that's true.
yeah.
That's true.
And then let's also, as we're wrapping up, not forget to mention that as a result of taking that class on African art, you ended up teaching this for 18 years at UCLA.
I didn't teach African art, but I was so...
Art history.
I
Yeah.
taught art history at UCLA
Beautiful.
for 18 years.
Oh my gosh.
And
Great school, obviously.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. But if any of your followers would like to hear about the trips that I do or how they can get involved in African wildlife conservation, I would be pleased to speak with them And you have my email. Can you?
Why don't you give that to
It's
them?
mumseyart, MUMSEYART, at AOL.com.
And can they find you on Facebook too? Right?
Yes, I'm on Facebook as
Wonderful.
well. And I'm very anxious to broaden the scope of my knowledge, what I know, what I've found out. And perhaps somebody out there has some solutions that we haven't thought of
Wouldn't
before.
that be great? Wouldn't
That would be
great?
wonderful.
I know I have a friend has a film coming out about how to preserve the elephants. And then I just had a couple friends just get back from Africa. So I do have friends that are doing things on that continent. Also, my sister-in-law does M2M, which is helping eradicate AIDS over there in children born to mothers of AIDS. So a lot of good work from Americans happening over there. And what I love about what you're doing is a really unique travel opportunity to learn about the continent, I think in a different way than obviously just, vacationing there. So
Right.
bravo for what you're doing.
Thank you.
Shedding light on it, opening people's eyes and giving them that amazing experience of going there. And just thank you for sharing your amazing story.
Thank you for inviting me to share.
You bet. All right. Well, be sure to tune in next week. We'll have another great guest, and be sure to look up Mumsey Nemiroff on Facebook, or give her a shout out on the email. You can replay this and get her email. Thank you so much for tuning in. Make it a great week. Hugs and happiness.